Hello YouTube and sourdough makers abroad. Today we're going to make no knead sourdough bread loaves, like for sandwich. You're going to need a bowl large enough to make 2 loaves of bread in. I'm using this 12-quart Cambro, but it's really only going to use like 5 quarts of it. You can get this at any restaurant supply store, and I like it because it's got a lid. We're going to need 600 grams of warm water. This is 98-degree water, but it's warm to the touch, not hot. Don't go over 100 degrees, that's important. And you might wonder, Sean, why did you say 600 grams of water? Well, as a baker, I turned it into science. And when I measure something, I can't guarantee that it's the right amount. Is it truly a cup? Am I right at the line? Or when I'm working with flour and I scoop my little cup in there, is it the right amount? Now, in the blog for the recipe for this, I put an estimate of how many cups each thing is. But when we're doing the recipe in the video here, I'm going to tell you just the weight. So this is 80 grams of whole wheat flour. Pour in the water. And this is 720 grams of bread flour. So it's higher in protein, makes more gluten. Pour that in here. Now, this is going to be the funniest recipe ever because we're not going to put any yeast or anything in it right now, and then we're not going to put sourdough starter in it, because the first step we're going to want to do is we're going to want to hydrate the flour. So to hydrate the flour, with the warm water and the flour together, we're going to get our hand wet. I just have this convenient warm water here to get my hand wet. And we're going to get in here and we're going to mix it up. And it's going to clump on us and get all gushy, and it's going to get all over our fingers. But what we're going to do is make sure that at the bottom of this bowl, there isn't any dry flour. We're going to smash it, twist it, pinch it to get that water in contact with all the flour. And I know this might seem odd to some of you in bread making, but when I started making sourdough bread, I struggled. And it was when I started to hydrate the flour first to make sure that it was at the hydration level that I wanted it for the recipe before I went any farther, that I started being much more successful. So we are going to hydrate our flour first. So there you go. I can waste this much bread. No. Usually I do this over at the sink, but that makes a bad video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the other hand, and I'm going to squeegee off each one of my fingers here. Wet hands do not stick to bread or flour and water mix. This all back in here. And once I get my hands clean, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this sit for 30 minutes. But the point here is I want you to see, and you've already had your close-up, what this bread looks like, the moisture level that it looks like now. Because that's how you want your bread to look when you've started the hydration process. We're going to let this sit for 30 minutes. I'm not going to leave it on a cold stone surface like my counter. I'm going to put it on a cooling rack, or I'm going to put it on my stove. And then we're going to come back in 30 minutes and we'll go on to the next step. All right, it's been 30 minutes. Our flour has hydrated. And now we're going to put in the last 3 ingredients. We have 4 grams of yeast, instant dry yeast. I do hear that there is now a shortage of instant dry yeast, so I'm going to start experimenting with the idea of making sourdough without yeast. Look for a video on that. I have 21 grams of kosher salt. No, don't put salt on top of yeast. It'll be fine. Because of the moisture level of the sourdough starter, it makes it so the salt does not kill the yeast. And then for the fun part, we're going to tar the scale and we're going to put 360 grams of sourdough starter. Now I want you to look at this. Extra bubbly. Now I stirred this 2 seconds ago and it's already bubbled back up again. This is active, gloriously active starter. So because it's hard to transition the weight, I want to let you know that when you're putting in your 360 grams of starter, get close. If you go over a little bit, don't fret, don't try to dig it back out, just put it in. You're gonna see that it's gonna stick to this cup, this measuring device. And I'm just going to get it over top here and scooch it, pour it, drip it in. It's 120. Of course, it's going to stick to your cup. It's okay. You get close, slow down. Once we get this all done and I get this mixed up, the next thing I'm going to do, of course, is feed this starter. 362 grams of sourdough starter. Gonna get this poor scale out from underneath this huge bowl. Get my water cup over here so I can get my hands wet. Now, we really want to get this mixed up. So I got my hand wet and I'm gonna mix it. Now, when we were talking about hydrating the flour, I showed you what mine looked like when I was done. But there are a lot of variables inside of making sourdough. One of them is how wet do you keep your starter? Because if you keep your starter wetter than I keep my starter, then you might not want as much water in your flour when you hydrate it. If the humidity is different where you are, and you find that once you do this, that your bread, I'm going to actually scrape the bottom of this bowl to get all the good stuff off. If you find that once you've got your starter in there and your flour is all hydrated, it's just too dry, just add a little water. The next time when you hydrate the flour, add more water to begin with. Okay, so I need you to see this little technique of mixing. I've got it basically mixed now. Everything seems fairly well incorporated, but I need to make sure that all of the goodness is all throughout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of line it up like a log, and I'm just going to pinch it. See, I'm making a terrible mess out of it. I'm just going to crush it between my fingers all the way along its length. And I'm going to scoop it back up. I'm going to smash it on top of itself a couple times, and then I'm going to pinch it again. Now, when you're pinching it like this, if there was a clump in there or a grain of salt that wasn't incorporated yet, you'd feel it because I'm squishing this poor dough through my hands. And then I'm going to reincorporate it again by smashing it a couple times. So what we're going to do, we're going to let this sit for 30 minutes. We're going to come back and we're going to do the first pull. Instead of kneading it, we're going to pull it, and that's going to make the gluten that we want to make it a good loaf of bread. So just as a reminder, when you hydrate, if it doesn't quite look as wet as mine did, give it a little bit more water. If it looks too wet, it can actually handle being a little too wet in your first batch, and then just adjust it on the next one. Put a note on my recipe saying don't do 600 grams, only do 580 grams. In the summertime, this recipe actually gets wetter for me, and I can downgrade to 580 grams. I've never had to go over 600 though. My mom, who lives in Kentucky, her volume of water is different, and we're just looking for a given moisture content when it's hydrated and then when you have it mixed up. It should be nice and sloppy like this and look wet. That's perfect. See you in 30 minutes. All right, it's been 30 minutes. We're close to the bread, so I can show you that it has spread out. You can kind of see a couple of little bubbles in there because the yeast is awake and active. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start the process of making gluten. You need to do this 3 times, and in my opinion, this is way faster and easier than kneading bread. So what we're going to do is we're going to wet our hand, and I'm going to scoop in underneath one side of the bread, and I'm going to pull it up. See how it's all holy and stringy and no good. I just flop it over on itself. I'm going to turn it 1/4 of a turn. I'm going to scoop underneath the bread again. I'm going to lift it up, a little less holy this time. I'm going to flop it down. I'm going to turn it 1/4, I'm going to grab a hold of this side. I'm going to pull it up. Well, look, it's getting tighter. You can pull up the whole dough ball. One more time. And then we'll get close again so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to bounce it a little bit. See, I'm trying to get it to stretch. This is where the gluten comes from. I don't want it to tear. Now, it was all spread out, but now it's a tight little bundle again. We're going to let this sit for 30 minutes. It's going to scoosh back out again. I'm going to come in. I'm going to stretch it. The same thing I just did. We're going to let it sit for 30 more minutes. I'm going to do it one more time. And once I've done it my third time at 30-minute intervals, I'm going to let it sit until it doubles. So now we're just going to cover it back up and we're going to let it double. That can take 2.5 to 5 hours depending on the weather. It's kind of cool in here, but once it's doubled, bring you back in and we're going to make loaves out of this thing. See you soon. All right, so we've let the dough rise. It has doubled. In this container, that's doubled. So now what we need to do is cut it into loaves. Cut it and shape it into loaves. First step, we're going to take and turn it upside down. Just going to keep an eye on it. It will come out of here, but I'm not going to force it out because I don't want to punch down this dough. I want it to keep the air that it works so hard to get. The next step is going to make you think you should have just punched down the dough, but this is how I do it. Eventually, it will plunk out onto this floured counter that I have here, and I'm going to try to keep it mostly on the flour if I can, and not on the stove. All right, came out pretty clean. Now, I want you to notice that I floured this side of the counter, but I didn't flour this side of the counter. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to make a skin on this dough, and I want the non-flour lubricated side of this counter to stay that way while I'm doing it. And of all the things that we've done, making the skin on top of the dough is going to be the trickiest one. And you're going to get frustrated with it. Just want you to relax and keep trying it. The first time I did it, super clunky. Second time, a little better. Third time, etc. until I got good. So let's get back to the step at hand. I have a dough knife. The bread dough is about yo big. This is about the middle. Notice that I'm using the word about quite a bit. I'm going to take and make a little line of flour, a straight line of flour across the dough at about the center point. It is a little taller on this side, so I'm going to come on this side of my line. And basically this line of flour is to help prevent the dough knife from sticking. So I'm going to push it all the way in and just kind of pull it. All right, here we go, cut dough. Now before I started this, I already buttered the pans. So they're all looped up. I'm going to get a little flour on my hands here because this is sticky. I'm not trying to over flour the dough. I'm going to put it out here in my non-floured runway, which immediately of course gets it floured. I'm going to tuck my fingers under the dough about 1/4 inch. And I'm going to push my fingers down onto the countertop, and I'm just going to pull forward. And if you, let's come around this side and get a look. What you'll see is the leading edge is going to tuck under the dough and pull, and it's going to stretch this skin across the front. Now right here the dough is a little bit too sticky for me, so I'm going to get a little bit of flour. I'm going to just pat just a little bit on it. I'm going to turn it. I'm going to do this 4 times where I'm just pulling it. You can see the air bubbles forming and coming out here. I'm going to lift my arm and do this very awkwardly so the camera can see it. But right there, the skin changed from kind of lumpy and pulley to almost smooth. And that's what we're looking for. And as soon as I get that smooth starting, I'm going to stop rotating at 1/4 of a turn, and I'm going to start rotating at 1/2 a turn. It's getting sticky again, so instead of powdering it one more time, I'm just going to powder my hands. And I'm going to pull that forward, and right there, look at that. It gets that nice smooth skin about it. Now when I rub my hand over, of course it messes it up, but a nice smooth skin. Now that tautness is what helps it keep in its loaf shape when it's baking. So I'm going to take this loaf, pick it up, I'm going to keep that bottom down, and I'm just going to put it in the pan. Boom. I take the other half. Why is the second half always stickier than the first half? Plunk it over here. Bust it out faster. Remember, I'm tucking my fingers, I'm putting my fingers on the countertop, I'm getting it about a 1/4 inch under the leading edge or the far edge of the dough, and then I'm giving it a pull. Don't want this part to roll, and what will happen is the leading edge will actually push into my fingertips. And then I know I'm doing it right. Okay, so it's got that shiny again, so I'm going to start flipping it all the way around because I'm trying to make a loaf shape. I'm not trying to turn it into a ball. This one is a little bit wet, so I'm going to pat a little bit of flour on it, stirring. Actually going to change angles. Get a nice smooth surface. Put it in my pan. What am I going to do now? I have 2 options, and these options are listed in the recipe. I have my quick rise option, and then I have my overnight rise option. I actually prefer the overnight rise option, so I'm going to tell you that one first. I take a 1.5 gallon Ziploc bag. I spray a pan on one side of it, and then I take the loaf and I put it in dough side towards the pan side. And all that's doing is stopping the loaf when it grows from sticking. I'm going to take this pan inside of its sealed Ziploc bag, and I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for 12 to 13 hours. And it's going to slowly rise. And when it does that slow rising thing, it actually incorporates a little nutty flavor into the sourdough. The other option is to take both these loaf pans, lay out a piece of plastic wrap, spray it with pan, cooking oil, and drape it over the top. Leave it in a nice warm place. When it's doubled, let me correct that. When it's almost doubled, we're going to turn on the oven to 450 and let it have almost a full hour to heat up before we cook. So when I come back, the oven will be on and hot, and we'll talk about cooking. After storing the bread in the Ziploc bags in the refrigerator for 13 hours, take them out. I put them on a jelly roll like this because it makes it easier and faster for me to get them in and out of the oven. The point here is to not to let all the heat out of the oven when you put them in. They've actually been out of the refrigerator for an hour. When I took them out, I turned the oven on to 450. It's important to allow your oven to get the temp first. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to hit this with 450. It's going to get all the little air bubbles and stuff to get a little bigger, raise my bread that last time. I have the timer here set to 19 minutes. We're going to run for 19 minutes. And then once the timer goes off, I'm just going to take and press the oven controls to lower it down to 350 and then reset the timer for 19 minutes. In my oven, that makes a perfectly baked loaf that comes out just a little bit over 190 degrees internal temperature when I read it with an instant thermometer. All right, so quick is the key. Don't burn yourself, but be quick. See you in 19 minutes. This is harder than you think. Changing an oven through a camera. I didn't open it, neither should you. Two, one. All right, let's give it a check. Got my instant read thermometer out. Pull it out here. stick it in the middle, and we only want it to go down to the middle of the bread, so don't get too crazy. And the thermometer says it's 196, 195. It's perfect. Get these bad boys out of the oven. Do it without burning myself. And then we're going to turn it out. It should come right out. Boom, boom, just like that. Roll it over. Now, you're going to be tempted to eat it. Give it 10 minutes. Give it 20 minutes. Let the bread finish. And then slice into it and have a glorious bite of your own homemade sourdough that came from the air. See you next time.